It might seem a little insane, but taking a car to the moon on the last 3 Apollo missions was actually a really worthwhile endeavor for NASA. I'm Amy Shearer-Tidal, and this episode of Vintage Space is all about the Apollo lunar roving vehicle. It wasn't until early 1970, after the first 2 successful lunar landing missions were done, that NASA contracted Boeing to build the Apollo lunar rover. The purpose was to give Apollo astronauts a way to cover more ground during their brief stays on the moon. But to function in the lunar environment, it had to be a lightweight vehicle that was still sturdy enough to carry 2 men, their tools, and all of the samples they would gather, across a wide variety of terrains and through a large range of temperatures. The final vehicle resembled an open car design with wire mesh wheels. But to really be useful, engineers had to figure out a way to get it from a stored position in the lunar module onto the lunar surface, and it had to be something astronauts could do wearing their bulky pressure gloves. The solution was to fold the rover against the side of the lunar module's descent stage in Quadrant 1, one of 4 available storage bays. It was stored with the bottom of its central chassis or frame facing out and its forward and rear chassis sections folded onto that center section. The wire wheels were folded into those sections. Deployment began with one of the astronauts pulling a cable attached to the rover's aft chassis before handing it off to his moonwalking companion, who would hold it for tension. Next, the astronaut would climb up the lunar module's ladder to pull a D-ring, releasing the rover's upper restraint and allowing it to fall about 5 inches away from the spacecraft. Pulling a mylar tape on the other side of the rover continued its deployment. As it lowered to the surface, 2 support cables released that in turn triggered a push-off tube that moved the rover's center of gravity outward away from the lunar module. Release pins on the chassis also pulled out, letting the base of the vehicle unfold. The wheels sprung into their deployed positions thanks to torsion bars. Finally, telescoping tubes made sure the rover moved away from the spacecraft as the wheels hit the dust.
RichPlanet Television is sponsored by mousemesh.co.uk, protecting airbricks in homes from uninvited guests.
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. On last week's show we presented the Mars Rover hypothesis, in which I suggested that the Mars Rovers, which according to NASA landed on Mars and are sending back images of Mars, could in fact be at remote locations on the Earth as part of a well-organised deception. We examined photographs produced by NASA, allegedly taken from the Martian surface, which appear to show objects commonly found on the Earth. Starting with a small rodent identified possibly as an Arctic lemming, a lump of wood possibly from an old railway sleeper, the vertebra of a large sea creature, a bone identified possibly as a walrus arm bone, lichen growing on rocks, a crinoid fossil, and also photographs which prove NASA have falsified the colours in many of their images. The question which arises is, do these anomalies provide evidence that all the images from the Mars rovers are in fact being taken from remote locations on the Earth? Coming up in today's show, we examine more evidence and discuss the possible reasons why this might have been done.
Now let's come on to impossible weather, Andrew. We just need to point out what the Martian atmosphere is like first. It's composed primarily of carbon dioxide, 95.3%, and is 100 times less dense than the Earth. The atmospheric pressure is much lower than on Earth, 600 pascals compared to 100,000 101,000 pascals on Earth. Current scientific thinking states that there is no liquid water on Mars, and it can only exist as vapor or ice due to the atmospheric conditions. So just expand on that for us, Andrew. Why can't you have rain or flowing water on Mars?
Yeah, well, if the atmospheric pressure is much lower, then any water that would normally be in a liquid form will immediately, you know, because there's no pressure to make it sort of form into a liquid, it just becomes vapor. So you don't have liquid water, and of course because the temperature is very cold, then you wouldn't get really droplets of vapor, or, you know, particles of vapor, whatever you want to call them. It would form layers of ice. You know, so
it's either ice or vapor, not running water, or droplets and that kind of thing.
Because of the low pressure.
All right, well, let's look at this next image, which appears to show some sort of moisture on the lens of the rover, which it could be dust, but you would say it's not, or we would say it's not dust because it clears up a day or two later. Right,
so I mean, you know, I hadn't seen this image before you brought it to my attention. I think it was Douglas that mentioned it to you. And so, yeah, what are we looking at? Why is this dust? I mean, we don't really know for sure, but as my understanding, they don't have any way of cleaning the lenses. So if this dust has blown up from the surface and somehow stuck to the lens, it should stay there forever. You know, there's no way to clean it off, or until there's another sufficient gust of wind to blow it all off again, which is that what happened? Well,
there's no windscreen wipers.
There's no windscreen wipers that I'm aware of.
Right. So also in this image we see, if we look carefully at the soil and we animate the soil over a period of about 7 days, by putting one image next to in a sequence, we can see that clearly the soil looks like it's damp and is moving in a particular direction.
Because that's the real giveaway. You can see there's definitely something soaking away into the sand over the subsequent days. I mean, it's really glaringly obvious, and yet NASA's still claiming there's no water on Mars.
So would you say that shouldn't be able to happen on Mars either, Andrew?
Well, it's not according to what they tell us about the atmosphere.
I think it's just colour changes in the sand as the moisture drains into the sand. I don't think the sand itself is actually moving.
Right.
I mean, one thing we did talk about in email, I think, Richard, is to be more sure of this, we'd need to say, let's just say, for example, we were able to find out where these rovers really were, if they were on the Earth. We would need to try and find out the weather conditions for that place, and then see if we could match those with anything that was shown on the sequence of rover images. That's one thing we haven't looked at, and I'd be interested from anybody that would be able to do that.
Right, and we've got another pair of images there which were obviously taken at different times, slightly different angle, which suggests that perhaps the soil has moved from one to the other.
And this is something that Charles Schultz has he had on his website. I don't know whether it's in his book, that we can clearly see evidence that it looks like there's been some type of water flow which has smoothed over some of the grooves on the ground, you know, the channels that are filled up with silt. It's pretty clear to me that this is what's happened in these images.
Now we come on to the cleaning events, because I think it's the Opportunity rover, its solar panels became dusty, and therefore they weren't getting as much power, and the thing conked out, I believe. Is that correct? At some point?
Yeah, very nearly conked out. I think they even claimed that the memory on the rover was starting to malfunction due to lack of power, and then miraculously the solar panels were suddenly clean again.
Right, so the solar panels were suddenly clean. Now they put this down to some kind of sandstorm. Just to tell us about that, Douglas.
Yeah, well, they've given us photographs with dust devils going past in the background, so they're claiming that these dust devils have been periodically cleaning the solar panels. But actually there's an article in New Scientist saying that all these cleaning events have happened in the middle of the night, which seems unlikely if dust devils is the
dust devil will be more likely to occur during the day, you think?
That's right, but also the Martian atmosphere is something like 1/200th of the density of the Earth's atmosphere.
So any wind is going to be 1/200th times less powerful.
Exactly.
Right. So it's difficult to think how something like that could clean a solar panel that's become covered in dust.
That's right.
And in some of the images, people have alleged that the cleaning has been highly selective, in that some of the hinges, there's a photograph where you showed me of some of the hinges of the rover appear to be sparkling clean with no dust on them, and the solar panels more dust on them.
That's right. There was a very, very interesting article by Ted Twinemeyer saying that some of the solar panels appeared to have been cleaned whilst others hadn't. Also, the hinges on the solar panels appeared to be clean when the solar panels were still dirty, and he even believes there are fingerprints in the dust on the solar panels.
Right. So we can have a look at this image here, which appears to show a finger or a thumbprint on the edge of the solar panel. If we just zoom in on that, and one thing I was going to do is perhaps do some calculations on that, what appears to be a fingerprint, just to see if it's the right size for a fingerprint. It certainly seems unlikely that if a solar panel has got so dirty that it can no longer recharge a battery, that it's starting to malfunction, that suddenly it all comes back to life again.
If you park your car in the street for 6 months, it gets really dirty. Does it ever end up clean again?
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Well, I suppose the rain might, but then of course there's no rain on Mars. So.
Now, I've included some of the NASA images from Apollo, just to show that there's proof that NASA do fake their images, right, on the moon landings. Yeah. So we're just going to look at a few of them now. So this is evidence of previous faking. That's why I've put this in. A chap called David Percy has taken 4 NASA images, which is NASA image AS171342047 to 20443, and he stitched them together because they're different sections of the moon. And then he's taken another set, NASA image AS17147224494 to 22521, and he stitched those together. So he's got 2 composite images, and he's compared them, and we can see there. Tell us the anomaly that we're looking at.
Yeah, so that image is essentially you have a problem with the parallax, because the backdrop for those 2 sets of images is identical, or it's very nearly identical, and yet in one image we have the lunar module in the foreground, fairly close to the camera, and then in the other it's way over to the right, and we have an astronaut, whichever one it is, I don't know, in the foreground. Yet the backdrop is identical, as if we're, what are the chances of having the camera pointed with exactly the same field of view? And
just to explain the problem with that, Andrew, and that is that the lunar lander that you see there in the foreground lands on the surface of the moon, and then when the astronauts leave, the top part kind of explodes away, and then they get back to Earth.
Yeah, so there's no way for it to move after it's landed.
So the lander can't move on the surface of the moon at all. It has to stay in the same position. We see it in 2 different positions on the same mission.
Yeah.
So people have looked at this and have concluded that what you're looking at there is a stage set with the front projection system generating the artificial background on there.
Right.
Probably with the help of Stanley Kubrick.
Something like that, yeah, because he was using that method in 2001: A Space Odyssey around the same time.
The Mars Rover missions, or Mars Rover deception, in my opinion, it's a continuation in many ways of the Apollo deception. All the evidence suggests that Stanley Kubrick faked a lot of the moon photographs on one of his big sets, and perfected techniques for joining, or as best as possible, joining the foreground with the background to create the illusion of a whole landscape. But of course you can do that now using CGI, so you can film outdoors and put in whatever background you like. Which is exactly what I think they're doing, because obviously they need to disguise whatever skyline, whatever is in the background, which is likely to give away their location. They would need to replace that with something less identifiable.
RichPlanet Television is sponsored by mousemesh.co.uk, protecting airbricks in homes from uninvited guests.